The phone dinged and the screen lit up like a ray from God in the pitch-black car. Jack glanced at the screen for just a moment to see that it said, "New text from Miranda." The light from the screen faded as he took a sharp turn he didn't see coming. The pouring rain and indomitable night made a horrible combination. His car slid on the slick roads, but he made the turn. His passenger wasn't so lucky. She wailed like a dying cat and banged against the interior of the trunk. Her voice was strained and worn, not surprising after all the screeching she'd done. It broke Jack's heart to hear her like this. He tried to convince himself that that thing wasn't his mother anymore. Whatever was in there now had broken into her mind and made it its own. The same thing could have happened to him too, if he'd been home when she lit the fireplace. Another turn came up, and Jack took it much easier, but was blinded by the headlights of an oncoming car. He held one hand up to shield his eyes and lost control of the car. It slid hard to the right, over the curb and into a streetlight. His head smashed into the steering wheel and crushed his hand in the process. A crunch from his middle finger and a swell of fresh pain told him it was broken. Jack leaned back in his seat, holding his hurt hand, and glanced in the rearview mirror. He saw no taillights. Asshole, he thought as the thing in the trunk wailed again. He looked to his left at the street sign nearest him. It read, Sycamore Street. He was so close to his destination. It was only a couple of blocks, but could he get her there on his own? He fumbled around his passenger seat for his phone, only to remember he'd been in an accident, so it had probably fallen onto the floor. He reached below the seat and felt around the darkness. "Hey, you okay?" a man's voice shouted from outside. Jack sat up and looked around through all his windows until he spotted a small beam of light coming from down the road on his side of the car. Somebody was running up to him. He opened the door and tried to step out, only for his legs to disagree and bring him down. The man reached Jack and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Easy, buddy, easy," he said. "Take some breaths." "I'm good," Jack said after a few breaths, just shaken up. "What's your name?" "Jack. Jack Barnes." "All right, Jack. I'm Craig." Craig helped Jack get to his feet. He was still unsteady, but with a hand on the roof of his car, he could stand. In the faint glow of Craig's flashlight, Jack could see he was an older white man, bald with no facial hair but deep forehead wrinkles just above the bushy gray eyebrows. "Where you headed in this weather?" Craig asked. "Gotta get my mom to a doctor," Jack said. It was in that moment, the same one where Craig shined his light into Jack's car, that he realized two things. First, the thing in his mother's skin had been quiet this whole time. Second, she wasn't in his back seat, or anywhere else in the car that Craig could see. The older man looked hard, but when he didn't see anything, his tone shifted. "There ain't nobody in that car, son," he said. "What?" Jack said, with feigned ignorance. He made a show of looking into the vehicle himself before turning back to Craig. "Must be my head," he said. "I hit it pretty hard in the crash." "Here, let me look at you," Craig said. He shined the light into Jack's face, checking his pupils and feeling around his head and neck. When he was satisfied, he looked at the finger Jack cradled and determined it was indeed broken. "You look fine to me, but we should still call an ambulance," he said, his examination complete. "No, that's fine," Jack said all too quickly. "I can just call a tow truck to get me out of here." "No, that's not fine. You need a proper look over to make sure there ain't something really wrong with your noggin." "There's a lot more wrong with me than you know, brother," Jack thought to himself. "Really, I can't afford an ambulance," is what he said aloud. "I'll pay for it." Jack bit his lip. This man was so ungodly kind. It made what he had to do next even more unbearable. "Okay, let me grab my phone and I'll call," Jack said. Craig nodded, and Jack went back into his car to rummage for his phone. As he did so, he grabbed the tire iron he kept stashed beneath the passenger seat. "Found it," Jack said, sliding back out of the car. "Good. Now why don't we head back to my place?" Craig didn't get to finish his sentence. The tire iron made a wet whacking sound against the side of his head, echoed by a deft ringing of metal. The man folded onto his right side, and the flashlight went sailing across the street and into the far ditch. "What?" Craig mumbled. Jack brought the tire iron down on his head again. Not hard enough to cause serious damage, but enough to shut him off. Blood ran down the side of Craig's head and was carried by the pelting rain. His chest still rose and fell, which Jack thanked God for. "You monster!" his mother shouted from the trunk. She began her tirade anew as Jack pulled Craig up and into the back seat of his car. It was the best he could do for the man right now. He'd call for an ambulance once he and the thing were where they needed to be. With Craig secured, Jack took a moment to catch his breath. He was drenched from head to toe now, and shivering from the rigid rain that sucked the warmth from his body. As his mother thrashed and wailed in the trunk, his mind wandered, for only a second, back through his life. Memories of birthday parties, trips to the mall, and building snowmen rolled by like a slideshow. Every single one featured his mother, smiling wide and proud. Tears mixed with the rain on Jack's face as the memories mixed and soured with the present. "Got some heavy rain coming later this week," the radio announcer said. "But for today and tomorrow, enjoy the sunshine with highs in the mid-50s. It's been a long winter, folks, but spring is finally here." Jack drove his 1980 Buick Regal down a winding back road in northern Wisconsin. The sun had just begun to set and was transitioning into its golden hour. The light reflected off the Buick's maroon hood nicely. Jack smiled as memories of his father, who was the car's previous owner, surfaced. Though he wasn't around to ride in her anymore, Jack always felt closer to his dad when he drove the car. Jess was her name. His dad never said why he named the car that, but the name had stuck. He glanced down at the dash to check his speed and found his gas was running low. Cursing himself for not stopping at a Quick Trip in the last town he'd gone through, Jack looked ahead for any road signs or gas stations. There were none. That was okay, though. He still had plenty of time before he was out. He crested a hill and saw a long expanse of flat road laid out before him. Fields ran along either side of the road, occasionally broken up by fences or clusters of farm buildings. Crap, Jack thought. There were no road signs in sight. So he did something most people never do in the 21st century. He asked for directions from a local. Along the road, there was an older farmer type walking out to his mailbox. From about 50 yards away, Jack honked twice to get the man's attention, then pulled up beside him. He reached across the car to roll down the passenger window, and the man stuck his pudgy white face into the opening. "Sorry to bother you," Jack said, with what he hoped was a winning smile. "I'm just running a bit low on gas. You know where a pump might be?" "Yeah," the farmer replied. "Just go down the road here about a mile or so, and it'll be on your right. You can't miss it. It ain't no quickie trip, but it's got gas, that's for sure. They sell local produce there, too." Jack glanced over the man's shoulder at one of the 3 silos that stood on his property. Greenbrier Farms was stamped clearly on the side of one. He continued to smile at the man. "Thank you very much," he said. "I might just get a little snack while I'm there, too." Now it was the farmer's turn to smile. "You have a good day now, and safe travels." Jack waved at the man and pulled back onto the road. He wasn't really all that hungry, and he had brought snacks with him for the drive, but he figured he could keep an eye out for anything marked with Greenbrier Farms. Mom sure would appreciate some fresh produce at the very least. Just as the farmer had said, after about a mile, Jack saw the gas station off in the distance. He pulled in at a pump only a minute or so later. The whole operation was dated as hell. Analog dials on the pumps, the sign displaying gas prices wasn't digital, and there was a clerk stationed outside to pump gas for you. The only modern things in the place were the clothes the clerk wore and the cash register Jack had to pay at. The main building of the station was barn-styled, with bright red walls and green metal roofing. 3 garage-esque entrances faced the road, trimmed in bright white. Inside were rows of produce, boxes of tomatoes, corn husks, cucumbers, carrots, and so on. The selection was a bit sparse due to spring just arriving, but Jack wasn't a farmer. He had no clue how any of this business worked. He browsed the selection for a bit, looking for that patented Greenbrier logo, but found nothing worth his money. So he walked up to the counter to pay for his gas. The lady operating the cash register looked like she'd been there since the place was built. Her gray hair was pulled back into a neat bun and she wore a faded red flannel. She had more wrinkles than Jack had ever seen on a person, and he thought, with some guilt, that she looked like the result of a prune and a raisin copulating. "Hello, dear," she said, smiling in that toothless way only old people can. "Hello, ma'am," Jack said. 30 on pump 3, please." "Oh, is that your car out there?" "Yep, it was my dad's, but I drive her now." "Very nice. I haven't seen a car like that since... well, I can't remember." She laughed. "It's been a long time, anywho." She rang him up with practiced slowness. As in, she knew which buttons to press, but her joints and muscles couldn't move like they used to. Jack was okay with waiting, though. He had all the time in the world. "We've got a sale on firewood," she said after punching in his gas. "Only $2 for a bundle. 3 if you get 2. "No, thanks. I don't need any," Jack said. "Are you sure? It's locally grown and cut. You can't get anything like it anywhere else." "I'm sure it's nice, but really, I don't need any." "Take a breath, dear. Tell me what you smell." Jack paused for a moment, but complied with the woman's request. He thought it better to humor her, then politely decline one more time. He breathed in through his nose, and was hit with a scent so rich and woodsy it almost made him physically stumble. It was good. Warm. Nostalgic. Homey. All these things ignited in his head with a single breath. How had he not smelled it when he walked in? "Smells good, doesn't it?" the woman said, her smile not wavering. "Yeah, it does," Jack admitted. "How did you get them to smell that way?" "Oh, it's a local secret. Something our farmers do after they cut down the trees and split the logs. Brings out the best scent." Jack thought about his mom. With Dad gone, she lived alone in their old house. A house so old it still used a wood furnace for heat. He thought about the meager produce on display, and figured maybe the wood would be a decent substitute. "Do you have any from Greenbrier Farms?" he asked. "Indeed we do," the woman said, her smile still unbroken. Jack arrived at his mom's house just as the day was giving way to night. The sky was still a bright, defiant orange when he stepped out to grab his bag from the trunk. He was only staying the weekend, so one duffel had him covered and freed up his hands to carry the 2 bundles of logs he'd bought. He looked up at the house, seeing clearly that the mint green paint needed a fresh coat, same with the white trim, and some branches had fallen on the roof, but overall, it looked steady. It bothered him to see his child home fading with time, but that feeling spawned the idea for him to come stay a week this summer and spruce up the place. The front door of the enclosed porch swung open, revealing his mother. She greeted him as he walked up the concrete path toward the house. She wore a gray cardigan pulled tight around her shoulders and dark blue jeans that didn't match with the house slippers on her feet. Her jet black hair did match his, but her green eyes were all her own. Jack had gotten his father's baby blues. Those eyes shone now with delight. "My boy," she said, pulling him into a hug. Jack dropped the logs and hugged her back. "Hey, Mom." "What are these?" She gestured to the logs once they'd separated. "Just a little gift. They're infused with some oils, I think. They smell really good. You're gonna love them." After he'd taken his stuff up to his old room, Jack and his mom sat in the kitchen to have coffee. He caught her up on what he was doing at school, how Miranda was doing, and the drive he'd taken up here. The whole time they talked, Jack was reminded why, even in the age of smartphones and social media, he only occasionally called his mom. "It's always nice to have things to talk about face to face," she told him before he moved off to college. "You can call me whenever you like, but try to save the big stuff for your visits, okay?" Back then, he didn't understand what she'd meant, but now he did. It was so much nicer to see someone's expression and body language shift as you told them about what's been happening. The conversation hit on a deeper level that you just can't get over the phone, with or without video. Plus, without constant updates digitally, it gave Jack a stronger incentive to actually visit rather than just call, which he liked very much. They talked for some time before ordering pizza and moving to the living room to watch Family Feud, a tradition they'd had since Jack was a sophomore in high school. Steve Harvey went about his usual antics, reacting to outlandish, but totally expected given the questions, answers in exaggerated fashion. They had a great time coming up with their own answers and swearing up and down they do better than the meatheads on set. By around 10 p.m., they both retired to their rooms for the night. Jack wasn't going to sleep just yet, though. He was at his desk, an old faux wood thing covered in scratches and dents from years of use and abuse, with the lamp on. He was leaning back in his chair with ankles crossed at the edge of the desk. It was a pose he'd struck a million times in his adolescence. One that was perfect for looking out the single window at the back of his room. Outside, the orange glow of the streetlight shined. He could see ghosts of the home across the street, but just barely. His eyes wandered to the top of the window frame, where only a few stars could be seen against the light pollution. If he could take the smell of those logs and turn it into a scene, it looked something like this. This was home. A remix track of Lost Woods from The Legend of Zelda began playing from his front pocket, shattering the mood. Jack pulled his phone out to see Miranda across the screen. He slid his thumb across the screen to answer. "Hey, babe." "You never called me when you arrived, mister," Miranda said. "I'm sorry. You know how my mom is. It takes time to catch up with her. Besides, we watched an insane episode of Family Feud. I can't be held accountable for getting distracted." "Oh, whatever." Jack could hear the smile in her voice. "I figured you'd made it safe when she didn't call me looking for you." "Well, I'm still sorry. I should have remembered to call you." They spoke for a bit, her catching him up on the day, him catching her up on his traveling. Jack thought somewhere in the back of his mind that a younger version of himself would be stoked to see him talking with an actual girlfriend on the phone. Crazy stuff, for sure. Once they were done talking and said their respective I love yous, Jack was again alone in the room. He kicked his feet back up on the desk and tried to recapture the feeling he'd had before Miranda called, but couldn't. With a sigh, he turned into bed for the night. The rest of the weekend went as they usually did. Jack and his mother went out on Saturday, first to the graveyard to clean up his dad's headstone, then to the mall for some shopping and lunch at Sbarro. The evening looked a lot like Jack's first, but instead of ordering pizza, his mom made a nice dinner of ham, mashed potatoes, and veggies with ice cream for dessert. By the time he was back in bed, Jack felt positively bloated. A comfortable fullness he almost never felt back in his dorm. He relished in the feeling, lying on his back with the bedroom window open and the cool spring air billowing in. After an amazing night's rest, Jack and his mother had breakfast, eggs, bacon, sausage, toast, and pancakes, before he began packing his things. As he did so, his mother stood in the doorway of his room. She wore the same sad smile she always did when it was time for him to leave. "You know, if I'd had any siblings, we could rotate weekends seeing you," Jack said. "Then you'd always have a kid around." He always wanted a sibling, or multiple. Jack's mom laughed. "You were plenty enough for your father and I." She held out her left hand and looked at her wedding ring, but folded it back across her chest after just a second. Before long, they were standing beside the old Buick in a tight hug. "Drive safe," his mom said, "and call me when you get home." "I will," Jack replied, "and you tell me what you think of those logs when you light them up." His mom hadn't put the logs in the furnace while he was there, which was a bummer. He was hoping to catch that scent again and see his mother's face when she smelled it for herself. "I will," she said, and the two separated. She placed a hand on his cheek, gazing at his face. Jack knew what was coming next. "You look so much like him." He smiled. It was the only response that had ever felt appropriate. "Love you, Mom." "I love you too, sweetie. Drive safe." She stepped back onto the lawn and watched Jack get in the car and eventually pull away. He honked twice as he did, and she waved goodbye in response. The drive home was moody. He had the radio on, but it was just background noise to the thoughts that buzzed through his mind. He was acutely aware that his mother was only getting older. Sure, she could still get around on her own just fine now, but in 10 years she'd be pushing 60, and he'd be in his 30s. In Jack's mind, 60 was a turning point. 60 was a grandparent's age. If things went well with Miranda, his mom might be a grandma by then. She would love that, of course, but seeing her grow older and older filled him with a sense of dread so deep he was afraid to jump into it. He might not come out if he did. Jack shook his head. He had to focus on what was happening now and appreciate just how good he had it. There'd be time to worry about those kinds of things later, a decade from now at least. He got to his dormitory just as the last rays of sunlight gave way to a starry night. He called his mom from the car, at literally the moment he was home and no longer driving. Then he called Miranda, who said she'd make her way over. Jack knew that his roommate, Phil, would be staying with his girlfriend that night, so Jack and Miranda would have the dorm all to themselves. Which is just fine by me, Jack thought to himself as he unloaded the Buick. Just fine. It was late Thursday afternoon when he got the call. Jack was at the library, watching thick gray clouds roll overhead, threatening the forecasted rain that had only worsened since Friday. It was a day that started as hoodie weather, but had transformed into t-shirt weather by 3 o'clock. Thank God the library was kept at a cool 68 degrees year-round. His phone buzzed on the table beside him, breaking his concentration. It didn't bother him, however. Jack had a do not disturb profile on his phone for when he studied. It kept everything silent except for calls from his mom and Miranda. So when he picked up the phone and saw Mom across the screen, he wasn't surprised. Just worried. He got up from his table, ducked into an independent study room, and closed the door. He slid his finger across the screen to answer the call. "Hey, Mom," he said. "What's up?" "Jack." He could hear the weariness in her voice. "Mom? What's going on? Are you okay?" "No." A sniffle came through the speaker. "I'm very sick." "The flu?" "Not sure." Another sniffle. "Only had it a day or two, but I'm scared." Jack sensed the unspoken question. "Can you come stay with me?" It wouldn't be the first time he'd done it since his father passed. He died of a sudden illness because he'd been too much of a man, Mom's words, not Jack's, to go see a doctor. Fluid had built up in his lungs, and he'd essentially drowned in his sleep. "Jack?" Her voice pulled him from his thoughts. "I'm still here, Mom. You want me to come stay for a bit?" "Can you? I'd hate for you to miss school." "I can do my classes online. Besides, you're more important." A short silence, then she replied, "All right. When can you make it?" "I'll get packed and head out tonight." The call ended shortly after, with Jack making his mother promise to call 911 if necessary. Like most people in America, though, she was afraid of having to pay the bill, as if the money would do her any good in the grave. Jack scolded himself for the grim thought, but didn't deny the truth in it. He fast walked from the library to his dorm, where he fast packed some clothes, then fast drove out of the city. All in all, it took him only 20 minutes. Once he was on the open road and relatively free of traffic, he called Miranda and explained what was going on. She was understanding, but the disappointment in her voice was poorly masked. She would miss him, and he would miss her, but Jack promised to make it up to her. By the time he arrived at his mother's house, it was pitch black outside, and the first tentative raindrops were falling. He grabbed his things from the trunk and ran up the path towards the house. His mom wasn't there to greet him at the door. What he wanted to do was kick the door in and yell for her. What he did was enter the house as quietly as possible. All the lights were off inside. The single light source came from the TV in the living room. He couldn't tell what she was watching, but it was some kind of game show from the sounds of it. Not Family Feud, though. A stench lingered in the air as well, like how a candle's scent fades after you put it out. It was there, but indiscernible. "Mom?" Jack said into the silence. "In here, sweetie," she replied. Her voice had become much scratchier in the time since her call. Jack stepped into the living room and found his mother there, laying on the couch covered in blankets. Only her head protruded from the top of the heap. Even in the dim light, Jack could see she was pale. Beads of sweat covered her face. Her vibrant green eyes were glassy, yet determined. Her fears hadn't taken away her spirit yet. "Oh, I'm so glad you're here," she said when he entered. "I'm glad to be here," he said, taking a seat in the recliner next to the couch. "How are you feeling?" "About the same as when I called you. though my throat has gotten worse." She coughed. Her throat sounded like it was covered with sandpaper. "Let me get you some water," Jack said, standing and heading to the kitchen. He came back with an ice-cold glass of water and handed it to her. She drank from the cup with gusto, as if she hadn't had a drink in days. When she set the glass down, it was more ice than water. "Thank you, dear," she said. "Need anything else?" Jack asked. "Not right now, no." "All right. I gotta call Miranda, let her know I'm here." "Jack Barnes, a man with many worried women in his life," she smiled. Jack smiled back, then went out the front door to make his call. It rang a few times before Miranda answered. "How is she?" she asked. "Fine," Jack said. "I think, anyway." "What do you think she's got?" "Dunno. The flu, maybe? A really aggravated cold? She's wrapped in blankets, sweating bullets, and her voice is like wood chips." Miranda said nothing right away, and Jack could practically see her rubbing her cheek with one hand like she always did when she was thinking hard. Finally, she spoke again. "Do you think she needs a hospital?" "Dunno," he said. "Well, okay, I don't think so. She says it's only been this bad for a day or two. I'd hate to jump the gun and take her there if it's not serious." "If it's been a day or two, it could be serious." "I know." Now it was Jack's turn to think. Emotions swirled in his head. Fear, uncertainty, love. He saw flashes of the day his father died. An ambulance pulling up in front of the house, lights and siren blaring. His mother holding him tightly as she sobbed. The EMTs taking his father away on a stretcher. He was already gone by then, but Jack wouldn't learn that for years. At the time, he thought his dad would be back home once the doctors healed him. After all, doctors always made people better. "Jack?" Miranda said, pulling him out of his head. Yeah, I'm here," he said. "Thinking about your dad?" That was obvious, huh? "Do you want me to drive up there?" He wanted her here very much, as a matter of fact. "No, not tonight, at least. It's gonna start coming down real soon." In the heat of the moment, Jack had forgotten about the rain, which was now coming down steadily. "Okay, I'll head up tomorrow morning then." "All right." That made him feel better. "I love you, Jack. Don't forget to take care of yourself and your mom. Tell her I say hi, too." "I love you too, Miranda, and I will." They lingered on the call for a few seconds, neither one wanting to hang up. It was Jack who finally pressed the red button. He hadn't lied when he said, "I will," but he hadn't exactly told the truth either. Given the swirl of feelings that had surfaced in his gut, out of a nebulous nowhere that was both obvious and unclear, he wasn't sure how to feel. This isn't like Dad, Jack thought, before he was shuffled back inside by the intensifying rain. The rest of the night was normal as it could be, anyway. He took his mom's temperature, gave her some cold medicine, and got her to eat some toast and crackers. Mostly, he just sat in the recliner beside the couch, watching whatever came on TV. By about 9 p.m., Jack was ready for bed. "I'll sleep on the couch," his mom said. "The stairs would be too much for me right now." Jack accepted this, but made sure her phone was within reach so she could call him if needed. He was only upstairs, but with her voice the way it was, he didn't want to take risks. He blew her an exaggerated kiss from the bottom of the steps, and she laughed. "Night, Mom," he said. "Good night, Travis," she said, her eyes fluttering. Jack's heart dropped hearing his father's name, but he didn't let it show. He just went upstairs, undressed, and crawled into bed, where sleep was only a suggestion. When he did finally conk out, his dreams were a mishmash of flashing lights, sobs, and squeaking stretcher wheels. The house rumbled with the crack of thunder. Jack stirred with the sound, his eyelids fighting to stay open. A flash of lightning lit up the room for a split second, then more thunder rattled the house. This gave Jack the shock he needed to fully awaken. He sat up in bed, breathing hard in rhythm with his pounding heart. He looked out the window, where he saw dark clouds full of lightning flashes. The rain pounded on the roof like someone drumming their fingers on a desk. He got a hold of his breathing and looked around his room. Everything was as it had been, except for one thing. The door. There was an 8-inch gap between the door itself and the frame. Jack knew he'd closed it before going to bed, as he couldn't sleep with the door open. His eyes locked onto the sliver of darkness in the gap. He intended to check the time on his phone, but something held his attention there. Another flash of brilliant lightning lit up the room, giving him an answer. Pressed into the gap was his mother's face. She had a wide smile on her lips, which were pulled back to show off her teeth. Her eyes radiated pure, unadulterated joy, like a kid who got the one present they wanted most for Christmas. There was something else off about them, though. Her pupils. They were like dimes, so wide they had completely swallowed the irises. "Mom?" Jack asked. Instead of a reply, the door blew inward and his mother ran into the room. She barreled into him, and they slammed into the wall beside the window. Her clammy hands were around his throat, and dry laughter escaped her stomach. Jack felt his windpipe close in her grip, and instead of words, a wet wheeze was all he could produce. She breathed fast, pushing hot air into his face. Like he'd practiced with his dad when he was little, Jack balled his hands together to form a wedge with his arms. He put the tip of this wedge between his mother's forearms and shoved upward with all his might. This got her hands off his throat and unbalanced her. She screamed as he shoved her off to the right. He heaved in oxygen. She crashed onto the floor, hitting her head hard on the desk as she fell, but it hardly bothered her. She was up and back on him in an instant, screaming bloody murder, but Jack was ready this time. He'd turned on the bed and got his legs in front of him. As she leapt to get another shot at his neck, he planted both feet on her stomach and pushed. She stumbled backward until she crashed through the now open doorway. Jack scrambled out of bed and onto his feet as he heard her tumble down the steps. Her screaming stopped, leaving him alone in the rumbling thunder and pounding rain. He rubbed his neck, where there would surely be bruises, and snuck towards the door. He strained his ears for any sounds from downstairs, but got nothing. After a few moments, he poked his head through the doorframe and looked down the steps. There she was, sprawled at the bottom like a starfish. Her lower half rested on the steps, while her upper half splayed out on the living room carpet. Her head was cocked to one side, and her eyes were closed. For a moment, Jack was scared she wasn't breathing. Then he made out the rise and fall of her chest in the dim light. He backed into his room and shut the door, locking it. He found his phone on the desk and picked it up, intending to call for help. When the scream came to life, however, he noticed that in the top right corner, the words "No service" had replaced the 4 bars that were usually there. Jack swore and pocketed the phone. He would have to take her... where, exactly? She might be too much for the hospital to handle, but she didn't need to be locked up in a cell for the night. She needed medical attention. After a brief back and forth, Jack decided it was worth the risk to take her to the hospital. Her health was what mattered to him more than anything. If they needed help keeping her in line, they had security and could call the police if necessary. He got dressed and left his room with his keys in hand. She was still at the bottom of the stairs, just as he'd last seen her, but the sight made his heart quicken. She would jump him if she woke up. When he went down the stairs, he stepped over her as best he could and went into the kitchen. There, he fished through their tool drawer and found a small bag of zip ties. He'd have to loop a few of them together to get the length right, but they'd work. With his mother bound by her wrists and ankles, not too tight, but secure, he hefted her up into his arms and carried her to the car. The rain was coming down in sheets, and the wind almost knocked Jack onto his ass in the front yard. He decided last minute that putting her in the trunk, while a bit cruel, would be safer for him. If she woke up and tried strangling him from the back seat, they'd both be screwed. Getting the door open with a 160-pound woman in his arms was a struggle, but he managed it. With her safely in the trunk, Jack slammed it shut and walked to the driver's seat. As he started the engine, a shuffling came from the trunk, then a pounding on the walls. "Jack?" his mother screamed. "What are you doing?" Her voice was ragged and strained, as it had been when he first arrived, but now had taken on a groaning, like she was speaking from her stomach. "Getting you help, Mom," he shouted back. "I'm gonna get you to the hospital." She yelled something back at him, but he ignored it as he focused on driving away from the curb. Leaning against his wrecked car, Jack felt himself melting. In just the span of a few hours, his entire world had flipped. His mother became a psychotic monster, resembling the woman he loved only in physical appearance, and he bludgeoned a man into unconsciousness. And for what? For trying to help him? It wouldn't have looked good, his mother screaming and raving in the trunk, but Jack could have explained. He could have, but he didn't. Instead, he'd let his fear overwhelm him and push him to do the unthinkable. Bile swelled in his throat, but he swallowed it. Everything was fucked up, sure, but his goal hadn't changed. He had to get his mother, and now Craig also, to the hospital. Consequences be damned. He stood up straight, took a breath, and got back into the car. To his surprise, it started up just fine. A cloud of something came up from around the hood, but Jess was still kicking. When he pulled into the ER at Walter Gray Memorial Hospital, all the staff were in shock at the state of his vehicle and of the man who sloshed out of the driver's seat and entered the building. He explained in a hitching, panicky way what was happening, and the staff moved quickly. Jack himself was escorted by a security guard to a nearby office, where he was handcuffed and watched. His mother and Craig were both taken in for care, though his mother had to be restrained by 3 security guards and bound to a stretcher. After about 10 minutes, police officers arrived and took Jack into the station for questioning. He was brought into an interrogation room where he met with Detective Hill, a man in his late 40s or early 50s who looked tired after a long career in police work. He sat across from Jack with a notepad and pen. He clicked the pen and spoke. "How's it going, Jack?" "How's my mom?" he replied. "Well, I don't know for sure, but I've heard she's a handful." Jack said nothing, so Detective Hill continued. "We've got a lot to talk about tonight. This is your chance to tell your side of everything." "I already told the people at the hospital what happened," Jack said. "Well, I would like to hear it from myself." Jack took in a deep breath and let it out in a long sigh. He told his story to the detective. The only feedback he received was the scratching of pen on paper whenever he said something deemed noteworthy. By the time he finished, Detective Hill clicked the pen in and leaned back in his seat. He rubbed his graying goatee in thought before speaking. "So, tell me again about the gas station where you bought the logs." This caught Jack off guard. He mostly glossed over that part of his story, framing it as just a pit stop. "Why?" he asked. "Just tell me." Jack did so. When he finished, the detective excused himself and left the room. A few moments later, he returned with a fold-out map of the county. "Could you point out whereabouts this gas station was, Mr. Barnes?" Jack looked over the map, found the road he usually took, and traced his finger along it until he reached a small squared-off section labeled Greenbrier Farm. "That's the farm I stopped at first," he said, then continued tracing his finger down the map. The gas station wasn't marked, so he estimated its location. Once he did so, Detective Hill rubbed his stubble again. "I see," was all he said before excusing himself again. He'd left the map on the table, so Jack continued his journey with his finger until he reached his mom's house. He stared at the spot like he was trying to drill a hole through the map as more memories filled his headspace. After some time, the detective returned to the room and sat across from Jack. The burly man laced his hands together and sighed. "Mr. Barnes, you're not on any drugs or alcohol, are you?" "God, no," Jack said. "Never touched the stuff." "Well, if that's the case, I'm not sure how to explain this to you, but there is no gas station there. At least, there hasn't been for well over 50 years. "What?" I mean, the building is still there, so are the old pumps as a matter of fact, but it hasn't been in working order since the 70s at least. "What about the farm? The Greenbriers?" "The Greenbriers did have a farm out there, but they moved on in the late 90s. The land is still in the family name, but the farmhouse and buildings are abandoned. Nobody's lived there for a long time. The county's been trying to buy the land for over 20 years now, actually." Jack's head was reeling. If the officer was telling the truth, then how the hell had he gotten gas at that station? And who had he spoken to at both there and the farm? It made no sense. "We'll send a patrol car out there in the morning," Detective Hill continued, "just in case there are squatters there or something. In the meantime, we'll have to keep you here." He hated it, but it was inevitable, Jack knew. He'd all but kidnapped his deranged mother and assaulted a man. He'd be in confinement for a long time, so he better get used to it. "All right," was all he said. In the weeks that followed, Craig recovered from his injuries, and Jack's mother returned to her normal self. The officers sent to investigate the gas station and Greenbrier Farm found nothing. Jack went to court over his actions, but a plea deal got him a relatively light sentence of 2 years with the possibility of parole after just 1 with good behavior. He got out on patrol after just 8 months. In that time, he'd been let go from his university and lost his job, but Miranda stayed with him, after a long conversation and explanation of why he did what he did. When he was set free, Jack had to move back into his childhood home. His first night there, he had a long talk in the kitchen with his mother, and they both cried. Even after all this time, she still blamed herself for what had happened. Jack had to tell her 100 times over that fault didn't lie with either of them. They'd been caught in a trap set by forces they could not understand. "I know," his mother said through sniffles, "but if I had known where you got those logs, I would have thrown them out." Later on, after a quiet meal of frozen dinners, Jack found himself in his room again. The space now held a dubious place in his heart. The childhood wonder and joy mixed with the horror of that night to make a nauseating concoction. But he was determined to reclaim this room for himself and move on from that trauma. He leaned back in his chair and looked out the window. The warm glow of golden hour blanketed the trees and houses outside. A cool autumn breeze billowed in from the small opening at the bottom of the window. Jack took in a deep breath of the fresh air, knowing all too well that winter was coming, and soon he'd have to hunker down. "At least I'm home," he thought to himself. He was heading into a new chapter in his life. It was going to be hard, but Jack was ready. When you're at rock bottom, the only way to go is up.